I go by Dark Veil, and this is the Grimm Truth. Fairy tales were never stories. They were warnings. For 27 years, I've been telling stories about children the system failed. Every time my audience grew, more children disappeared. I thought I was exposing a monster. I didn't realize I was feeding it. I watched Petra Kovac's hands shake as she held the court transcript, not from fear, from hunger. She hadn't eaten in 3 hours. That was enough time to make her hands tremble. "Tell me about the measurements," I said. She sat down the paper and rolled up her sleeve. Faint scars circled her upper arm in neat intervals, like growth rings on a tree. "Every morning at 6, Frau Adler used a cloth tape, the kind tailors use. She'd measure my arms, my thighs, my waist. She'd write the numbers in a leather book, and then..." Petra closed her eyes. "Then she'd bake." I'm Sonia Castanos. I run a podcast called Systemic Failure about kids who fall through the cracks. 3 months ago, an elderly woman named Greta Adler was arrested in rural Oregon after hikers found a root cellar containing 17 sets of preserved remains. Tissue analysis suggested the bodies had been carefully butchered, brined, and stored like prosciutto or country ham. Greta didn't run, didn't lawyer up, just sat in the interrogation room and said, "You abandoned them. I finished the work." The case should have been simple. Deranged woman, tragic victims, justice served. Except the remains were children who disappeared across 14 states over 23 years. And Greta's property, according to every satellite image and surveyor's map, shouldn't exist. "What did she bake?" I asked Petra. "Everything. Stollen, Lebkuchen, these little marzipan animals that looked so real, I cried the first time I bit into one." Her voice dropped. She'd watch me eat, not smiling, just evaluating, like a jeweler examining a diamond for flaws. "How long were you there?" 6 months. Then one morning, Frau Adler measured me and sighed. She said I was insufficient and put me on a bus to Portland with $40 and a bag of cookies. Petra looked at me with eyes that had seen something fundamental break in the world's architecture. 16 other kids were there when I arrived. I was the only one who left. Did she ever say why? Why you were insufficient? Petra's voice became very quiet. She said some children still wanted the world. Others only wanted to be full. She said I still had hunger for something besides food. That's when I knew this wasn't about one crazy old woman. The retreat was called Wald House Renewal. Records showed it licensed in 2001 as a nutritional rehabilitation center for at-risk youth. The state inspections were glowing. Photos showing a beautiful timber structure with solar panels and organic gardens. Testimonials from former staff described life-changing work. But when I called those staff members, they all said the same strange thing. "I could never find it." "Twice," said Simon Chen, who claimed to have worked there for 3 years. "I'd drive out and the roads would just be there, like the forest wanted me to arrive, but if I tried to bring anyone else or take photos for my family, I'd get lost." "What did it smell like?" I asked. Silence. Then caramel, burning sugar, butter and cinnamon and something underneath it I couldn't quite determine. I smelled it in the trees a half a mile before I ever saw the building. I interviewed 9 former staff members. None could provide the exact address. None had photos. All of them had admitted they'd been paid in cash by a woman they only knew as Frau Adler. When I asked what happened to the children who didn't improve, they got quiet. She said they were transferred, Simon finally told me, to a secondary facility for advanced cases, but I never saw a van, never saw them leave. They'd just be gone, and there'd be fresh bread cooling on the racks. I submitted an FOIA request for satellite imagery of the area where the retreat supposedly stood. What I got back made me call the analyst 3 times to confirm it wasn't corrupted data. The structure appeared in imagery from 2003, 2007, 2011, 2015, 2018, and 2022. Different months, different seasons, but never in consecutive years. And each time it appeared, the building was subtly different. In 2003, it was a simple A-frame. By 2011, it had grown a wing. In 2018, the architecture had shifted into something that hurt to look at. All garbled windows and doors at wrong angles. The analyst told me the latest image, from 14 months ago, the structure had what appeared to be a commercial kitchen extension. Here's the weird part, she said. We cross-referenced appearance dates with missing children reports in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Every time that building shows up on a satellite, there's a spike in cases involving kids from foster care or court-mandated placements. How big a spike? Between 18 and 43 children, all labeled malnourished, neglected, or... She paused. The files use this phrase, emotionally feral. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What happens when the building disappears? I asked. The missing children reports drop to 0. Greta Adler wouldn't speak to journalists, wouldn't speak to prosecutors beyond her initial statement. But she agreed to speak with me after I sent her a letter describing my own childhood in the foster system. I'd been one of those malnourished, emotionally feral kids once. I knew what it felt like to be discarded. They brought her into the visitor room in handcuffs she didn't need. Greta was 83, small and neat, with the kind of face that probably looked like grandmother kind before you noticed her eyes. They were baker's eyes, evaluating and measuring. "You want to know if I'm a monster," she said, sitting down. "I want to know what you're preventing." She smiled for the first time. It wasn't warm. "The original story was corrupted over centuries," Greta said. "Hansel and Gretel were not clever children who outwitted a witch. They were starving, abandoned, already half dead when they found the house. The house found them. Actually, it always finds them. I don't understand. The forest is not a place, Miss Castanos. It's a threshold. When a society discards enough children, when the abandonments reach critical mass, the threshold opens. Something crosses over, something that has been hungry since before we had words for hunger." My mouth went dry. What kind of something? The brothers Grimm called it a witch to make it comprehensible, but it's older. It feeds on potential, on the future those children represented. Every child you throw away, every case you close, every foster placement you label as insufficient, you're ringing the dinner bell. So I couldn't finish. I intercept them, I measure them, I fatten them. I determine which can be saved, which are too far gone, which must be... She paused, choosing words carefully, rendered down, made into something useful, an offering. The forest accepts the offering and stays dormant. The threshold remains closed. You're insane. I was selective, Greta said. Her hands twitched when she said it. Just once. Careful. I only took what was necessary. My mother did this before me, and her mother before that. The recipe is older than Germany, older than borders. We are not monsters. We are the lock on a very terrible door. Bullshit, you murdered children. I called the already dead to save the living. Tell me, Miss Castanos, how many missing foster children has Oregon found in the 6 months since my arrest? I didn't answer because I already knew. 73, triple the usual rate. And how many have been found? She pressed. Thought about the news reports I'd been avoiding, the partial remains discovered in playground sandboxes, the small bones found in park trash cans, gnawed clean, the medical examiner's baffled statement that the trauma patterns suggested the children had been consumed while still alive. You're saying something else is taking them now? I whispered. I'm saying the lock is broken, the threshold is open, and it is very, very hungry. Greta leaned forward. I was selective, careful. I only took what was necessary, but now it feeds indiscriminately. Every abandoned child, every system failure, every caseworker who checks a box and moves on. You're feeding it yourselves. The guard signaled our time was up. It is manifesting more frequently now, Greta said as they led her away. Multiple locations. The forest is spreading. You cannot arrest a threshold, Miss Castellanos. You can only maintain it. That was 4 weeks ago. Yesterday, I received a leaked memo from the Department of Health and Human Services. It proposed amendments to federal child welfare software, new data fields, new checkboxes. One read, transfer status, completed/pending/manifestation protocol initiated. Another, placement type, standard/therapeutic/Wald House coordination. The memo was dated 3 days after Greta's arrest. It had been approved by 6 regional directors. Implementation was scheduled for next month across all 50 states. I called one of the directors, asked what Wald House coordination meant. She sounded confused, like she was reading the term for the first time. I'm not sure. It must have been added during the consolidation process. We've been streamlining placement options for high-risk cases. Some new private partnerships, I think. What private partnerships? I'd have to check the files. There have been so many new facilities opening, really promising outcomes from what I've heard. The children are very well fed. I hung up and pulled up the satellite data again. The structures weren't appearing and disappearing anymore. They were staying. 14 locations across 9 states, and more manifesting every week. The architecture was standardizing, industrial. The imagery showed delivery trucks, staff parking lots, playground equipment. It wasn't hiding anymore. It didn't need to. I spent 2 days calling child welfare offices, asking about new placement facilities. The pattern was consistent. Caseworkers described feeling relieved when they selected the Wald House option. One woman told me it felt like finally having a real solution for the hard cases. Another said the children who returned from short-term placements seemed remarkably well-adjusted, grateful, like they'd finally been fed properly. When I asked if any children had been transferred for long-term placement, she checked her database. Looks like 47 from our region alone, but they're marked as graduated to advanced integration. That's good, right? I checked the missing children reports for those regions. They'd dropped to 0. Not because the children were safe, because they were no longer categorized as missing. The system had reclassified them. There is no forest anymore. It's everywhere children are no longer wanted. I was writing up my findings when I decided to pull my own case file, just to be thorough, just to understand how I'd escaped what so many others hadn't. The file was larger than I remembered. There were pages I'd never seen, assessments, psychological evaluations, a recommendation from 1997 that I be transferred to Wald House Renewal for nutritional rehabilitation and behavioral correction. The transfer was scheduled for March 17, 1997. It never happened because my caseworker quit suddenly. The file was lost in the transition, and I aged out. I got lucky. Except there was a note attached to the cancellation form, handwritten, dated March 16, 1997. Subject displays insufficient yield potential. Emotional appetite remains externally oriented. Recommend release for a continued monitoring. Re-evaluation in 25 to 30 years, pending career trajectory and native influence metrics. The signature was illegible, but I recognized the handwriting from the leather measurement book Petra had described. I checked the date. 27 years ago. 27 years of building a podcast about systemic failure, about children falling through cracks, about a broken system that discards the vulnerable. I checked my download statistics. The spikes in listenership corresponded perfectly with the satellite manifestation dates. Every time I released an episode about system failures, about impossible choices, about children no one wanted, the numbers jumped. And 2 weeks later, a new facility would appear. My producer called it a coincidence, said true crime audiences just like controversy. But I pulled the listener surveys. Parents who'd surrendered children mentioned my show. Caseworkers who'd closed difficult cases cited my analysis. Policymakers who'd approved funding cuts referenced my reporting on resource constraints. I wasn't documenting the system's failure. I was feeding it, and I'd been growing hungrier every year. I hope you're enjoying my new series revealing the dark truths behind fairy tales. I find it incredibly enlightening to uncover the history and modern realities of fairy tales and how they are still impacting our modern world. If you like the story, please leave a comment or subscribe. It really does help my small channel get noticed by the algorithm. And until my next Dark Veil tale, have a frightfully fun day.